The Minister for Works and Housing yesterday, at a press briefing, announced some interventions for the housing markets in Ghana. Top of these interventions will be the establishment of a national mortgage fund, which will provide financial assistance to deal with challenges of acquiring homes. Let's hear from the Sector Minister, Samuel Atachia.
Now, let me address the National Housing and Mortgage Fund. It is said a man will run depending on what is chasing him. It is the position of the ministry that unless we deploy revolutionary financial mechanisms, the yawning housing deficit will mock us for a long time. It is in the light of the above that the ministry is working hand in hand with the Ministry of Finance to create a national housing and mortgage fund. The fund would be a special purpose vehicle to leverage private capital into housing and infrastructure investments, and also enable the Ministry of Works and Housing channel long-term appropriate price financing towards the housing sector. The fund will create for the first time in the financial space a credible mortgage regime in Ghana to enable majority of our people, especially workers, have their own homes in the evening of their years. The fund will be sourced from pension funds, housing bonds, grants, insurance companies, primary reserve of the central bank, treasury single account, and tax incentives. The ministry very much appreciates the pilot phase of the mortgage and housing finance market as captured at pages 64 and 65 of the budget statement and economic policy of the government of Ghana for the 2019 financial year.
Will this be a panacea to our housing problems? Philip Namfuri raises some questions. He joins me in the studio to explain and give us some more education on the topic. What exactly should a proposed mortgage fund look like? Okay, so Emmanuel, it's important to situate this into context. Everybody wants to own a home. Everybody wants to live in their own house. Nobody wants to rent forever. Nobody wants to live with a friend forever. But getting your own home comes with a cost. If you don't live in a house that's owned by your parents, you are going to start building from the scratch. It's going to cost you a lot. If you don't get a good contractor, it's going to really, really cost you. Then on the other hand, you can go and get a mortgage. And that one too is expensive because you'll be paying, servicing these loans over a course of 10, 15 to 20 years. But government feels that this is part of the reasons why we have a housing deficit. So they want to put this together. Over the course of financial years, we've seen different interventions in the housing market to help dealing with the housing deficit. The minister says it's around 2 million housing units. Previous years it was around 1.7 million. So they've come together, that's the Ministry of Works and Housing with the Ministry of Finance to put together a special purpose vehicle. And by this, I just mean a standalone entity. That's the National Mortgage Fund that will source capital and deal with this. We've put together an infographic to educate our viewers and listeners. So let's take a look at that and we'll continue our discussions. All right, so that looks like an outline of the whole mortgage scheme when it comes up. But Philip, will this really, or before then, could you explain to us what?
Certainly. So we have the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Works and Housing. They'll come together. They'll form, that was the first graph we showed, or the first picture. Then in the middle, we have the National Mortgage Fund, that's special purpose vehicle. It will be a standalone, so it will be a separate entity. You know, when we had the ESLA issue, there was a creation of a special purpose vehicle to deal with the issue separately. So that's that. Then there'll be sourcing funds from pension funds, housing bonds, from taxes, from, I'm sure, they said the Bank of Ghana's primary reserve and other sources. So that's basically the outline of the National Mortgage Fund. But I'm sure you want to know
whether it's really feasible
and
it will solve the problem, and at what cost. That's more important.
Okay, so mortgage funding, because of its long-term nature, requires long-term liabilities. And by long-term liabilities, I mean long-term funds. Okay. So somebody should be able to give you money for 10, 20, 30 years plus. Our deposit nature in the country, deposit profile is short-term. So banks are shunning away from mortgages. Okay. If you realize a bank like Republic Bank, GHL Bank are the ones who are very heavy when it comes to mortgage lending. Prior to GHL Bank becoming a bank, when it was Ghana Home Loans, most of their funding were from external sources. So they will give you the latitude and the room to lend long term. So it's always about getting long term funds. If you don't have access to long term funds, you can't really do anything in the mortgage market. Now, the other part is the cost. So with long term lending comes some cost of it, because most of them give you the mortgages in foreign currency, and then you pay in Ghana cedi. So anytime our cedi depreciates, you hear people who have taken mortgages complaining because it's becoming expensive to service it, just because they have to go and borrow these funds.
Now, one thing I wanted to find out from you is what about if we are supposed to use like the pension scheme funds, if you mortgage that pension scheme for a housing facility, for instance, would that affect my end of service, benefits, like end of pension benefits? Okay,
it's a fantastic question. Pension funds can help because of their also long-term liabilities, because you have a lot of years left, I have a lot of years left to work. But however, if you don't structure these properly, and these funds are given to people who are going to take mortgages, and they default, because this is 10 years, anything can happen. You can pass on, you can lose your job, that's your stable source of income, which you're going to use to service the debt. Then it becomes a problem. And if these things are not guaranteed, money going back to the pension funds will not provide the necessary return. So they'll have to price it into the mortgage that they're going to give you. So it will become a bit expensive, because you have to account for all the eventualities. If you pass on, if you lose your job, what happens to the pension funds they've taken from you and I now? And then when we are 60, 61, 62, and we have to fall back on, it becomes another problem.
And certainly this initiative is only for formal workers, not informal.
I would believe so. It's for formal workers. I beg your pardon, because it's going to involve some applications and some steady income, because mortgaging always has to deal with steady income. Every month you come here, we work, we are paid. The bank will deduct a certain amount from your income. So if all of a sudden you don't have any steady source of income, regular source of income, how are you going to service your mortgage? So it's a wonderful idea, but it's up to the government to ensure that it balances two things. One, affordability, and two, the commercial part of things. Because sourcing funds from private hands implies a return. Okay. So you have to balance the two. You can't just give out funds for free.
Does this situation happen elsewhere in the world, this intervention you're talking about?
Okay, so let me give you the US example. Prior to the 2008 financial crisis, some institutions like Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae were giving direct loans to people who wanted to buy homes. Then the investment banks realized that it was profitable. So what they did was to give money to these institutions, buy these loans, and sell these as securities to pension funds, etc. So what they stood in the middle, collected money from pension funds, gave it to these institutions, and then when you pay your mortgages, then your money goes to service those who have bought it. So it's possible. But however, when the mortgage market collapsed in the US, pension fund holders, everybody was affected. Right. So we must find a fine balance. We can use the pension funds, all right, but we must ensure that there's return guaranteed in it, so that when you're 60 and I'm 60, we have something to fall back on.
I believe we'll be talking to some prospective homeowners shortly to find out what they think about this whole initiative.
Sure, we will.
And bring up to speed with our viewers. And on that note, we wrap up this afternoon's edition of The Marketplace. Many thanks for your company. My name is Emmanuel Abuaji. Have a good afternoon.